Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell. You know what time it is. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to really turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. Now, I am super excited about our guest today. I have leadership experts, Karin and David Dye, here to talk about a subject, well, I'm not sure people really like to talk about, but I think it's a really important subject to talk about. And that is, how do you really handle workplace conflict? And today, I think we have a lot of it going on. So we'll be right back in a minute and dive into this subject. All right, welcome back. Let's not wait another moment and let's dive in. Welcome, Karin. Welcome, David. Glad to have you here.
We're absolutely delighted to be here. It's fun to talk with you again.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about when I was doing some research on your new book, the other books that you've written, the work that you do around leadership. But where I want to start is you both have such an interesting story. So tell the audience a little bit. David, you can jump in. And how did Let's Grow Leaders even come about?
Yeah, it took a minute. And I'll Karin speak for herself. But so I had a background in human service leadership, a 17-year career in that industry, and started blogging to get the word out to all the people around the country that I no longer could meet with individually just because of time constraints. And that eventually led me to start my own business in leadership, human-centered leadership development. And Karin and I were both blogging and met online in that capacity as leadership writers. And Karin had a really cool thought leadership carnival. She brought all these people together, and I'd contribute every month. And as we got to know each other's writing, I said, wow, we are really aligned. And so one day I reached out and said, hey, I'd love to collaborate on an article or a white paper or something at some point, because I think there's a lot of alignment in our thinking here. And so that was the first time we ever talked. Yeah. And I'll let Karin take it from there.
So, all right. So I, at that point, was an executive at Verizon, and I was also blogging. And so basically I decided it was pretty close to time to go do this. I ran into Shep Hyken. I was doing my very first keynote, and he said, hey, when are you going to leave Verizon and be a keynote speaker? So all this swirl is going on. David and I meet in a National Speakers Association book publishing lab, realize we're pretty much writing the same book. We decide, well, why don't we just write the book together instead of competing? We write the whole book. I'm living in Maryland. He's living in Colorado. And the whole time we're becoming really, really good friends. And all this stuff is happening in our life. Everything's swirling. And when we go out to start marketing the book, we realize that we have fallen in love. So we merged our businesses together. We got married, and now we get to collaborate every single day, which most of the time is good.
I get that. So what I found was so interesting when I've known you both a long time and have known your work. And when I think about so much of the work that you do, I think about developing leaders. I think about culture. I think about, the work and what it really takes to develop leaders and have good leadership. And in this newest book, you've really gone down this avenue, I feel like very niched around conflict. So I'm curious how that came about and why that particular subject.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the book before this was called Courageous Cultures. So how to build teams of micromanagers, problem solvers, and customer advocates, which is more of an executive book, right? It's a culture book. So HarperCollins, our publisher, called us and they're like, hey, you know what? Since the pandemic, we're getting a sense that there's a lot more conflict going on in the world. And I know you guys are working with organizations all over the world doing this Courageous Cultures. What if we found out what was actually happening at the front lines? Are we experiencing more conflict or not? And can you write a book that goes to everybody? right? That can help them navigate this conflict. And so because we don't do anything easy, we did the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey. And we talked with 5,000 people in 46 countries to find out, is there more conflict? And if so, what kinds of conflicts are we having? So I'll let David speak to a little bit about those findings.
Okay, yeah, because now we're really interested. Does it just seem like there's more conflict, or are we actually having more conflict?
Well, what the data said, and interesting, you talk about 46 countries. One of the first questions that comes up is like, was there a lot of variation between? And the interesting thing is, no, there was not. I mean, there was a little bit here and there. I can tell you some were higher, some were lower. And the US was on the higher end, but not the highest. But overall, 70% of those 5,000 plus people said that they're experiencing the same or greater or significantly greater amount of conflict than they were just a few years ago. And so kind of that intuition we all have, like it's validated by people's experience across the globe. And then what's interesting is you dive into that 30% who said they're experiencing less conflict than a few years ago. Like, okay, well, let's examine that. Why? Half of those folks said the reason they're experiencing less is because they left a conflict-prone, toxic workplace. They're primarily working from home now, and they're just, you know what, I'm not interacting with human beings, so I don't have the conflict. Wow. Which, either of those situations are more peaceful for that individual. But what's lost in that is all of the productive collaboration, creativity, problem solving, all the good things that we want. And that organization, of course, that was toxic and conflict prone has lost, a quality employee. And so even in that 30% who said they're experiencing less, it's not always a positive outcome.
Yeah. And we found the conflicts were getting more complex, Meridith. And so we call this conflict cocktails. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So for example, of course we like to name them because that's how we roll, but we have one we call the wedge driver. And so you've got, organizations that are changing, have so much change going on, and you've got a shortage of talent, and you've got people that are feeling overwhelmed. And that comes together to have conflict. Or you've got what we call the blown fuse, where you've got exhausted and tired customers. So either in healthcare or in retail or, or a barista, right? You've got people who are entering these institutions and they're exhausted, and also the workers are exhausted and feeling underpaid. And then you've got dynamics of tip creep and all that. So that is another example of a conflict cocktail.
So let me ask you this, a couple of questions here. And David, I'll start with you. While there aren't necessarily across countries, was there more conflict at different levels in an organization, in the sense that maybe there's more at the top, less lower levels, or the opposite? Did you find any of that in the research?
No, we didn't. And when you talk about conflict and you dive in, one of the questions we asked ourselves in analyzing the data is, okay, who are people having conflicts with? Yeah. Well, there's only a couple of choices when you get down to it. It's conflict with coworkers, it's conflict with my own manager, or it's conflict with customers. And we found all of those in abundance. And so at every level, one of the questions that we did ask qualitatively was, tell us about the biggest conflict that you've had in your career. One of the one that really sticks out in your mind. And most of those were either with a coworker or manager. A few were with customers, but most of them were either peer or manager. And, and so then we would ask people like, okay, if you could go back and talk to your former self, what advice would you give yourself about that? And that was fun. That was fun data to analyze. And I've never seen, Karin and I were like, wow, this is incredible. Because 5,000 people across the globe, can they agree on anything? Well, it turns out 55% of them said the advice they would give themselves would be to stay calm, be patient. And another 21% said my advice to myself would be to talk about it or talk about it sooner. And I just love that. 76% of 5,000 plus people around the world saying my advice would be stay calm, be patient, talk about it sooner. That's amazing. So there's some wisdom in all of that crowdsourced data. Now the question is, how do we do that? And that's why we wrote the book.
Yeah. And the thing about staying calm or talking about it, nobody got calm because you told them to calm down, right? So you need practical, tactical skills to stay calm and to talk about it and to get the courage to have the conversation that you might rather avoid. And so the book is called Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. And so we break down what are the conflicts that people are having, and then what exactly can you say? And so it starts with really 4 dimensions of collaboration or productive conflict. And so we start there, like, okay, you're in a conflict. What is needed now? Is it connection? Like, do we need to connect at a human level? Is it clarity? Do we need to get a shared understanding of success? Is it curiosity? Do we need to open our minds and consider one another's perspectives and what's possible? And then commitment, do we have a shared agreement? Because a lot of times, if you're ever in one of those Groundhog Day conflicts that keep happening again and again, it's that you didn't reach closure and finalize the next steps of what's happening in a very specific tactical way. And so that's where we start with these dimensions, and then we give people powerful phrases to have the conversation based on what kinds of conflict they're having.
It's so organized and so structured. Now, will I typically go through all 4 of those, or is it 1? Is it 2? Is it like, what am I, is one more important? Like, can I not have commitment if I don't have connection? How does all that work?
So it really depends on the specific scenario you're in. So sometimes you can have a really easy one where there's just a lack of clarity. We're connected. We know each other as human beings. We're staying curious and we do pretty good with our follow through. But what we're lacking is clarity. We're working from different interpretations of what our boss told us. I thought she said this. You thought she said that. We just need to fix that clarity, have that conversation, and we're off and running. We know how to do everything else. But let's take one of the more common and popular ones. How do I tell my boss no when I'm overwhelmed? That you're going to use all 4. You got to connect to the you got to say, hey, boss, I really care about this project. I care about our success as a team. Listen, then I'm going to go to clarity. I'm going to say, hey, listen, what I'm hearing you ask for is this. Do I have that right? Great. Okay. If we do that, here are the consequences as I understand them. Here's the impact on these other projects and things that you've asked for and the shifts that's going to cause in those, which I'm not sure that's what you're after. Then we get curious. My idea is, what if we resolve this way, propose a shift or resource difference, move the timelines? Hey, boss, what do you think? How do you see this? And then from that conversation, then we go to, okay, so what I hear you saying is that we're going to approach it this way. We're going to shift this timeline and I'm going to focus here. Do I have that right? Boom. Now we've got commitment. So in that more, a little higher level kind of collaborative conflict, I'm going to use all 4 dimensions.
Yeah. So Meridith, we were just at ATD, the Association for Talent Development Conference, and we were also doing informal research just of people who were walking by. And so we gave them stickers and say, okay, which of these dimensions do you think is most needed now in your organization? And it was overwhelmingly clarity.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting because I might have guessed connection.
I would have too.
Yeah.
That was number 2, but it was not very close. It was like,
but it was a pretty big sample there too, And so it was so that was very interesting.
So what is driving, like, why are we having more conflict now, Karin, than we have had in the past? Like, you do this research and obviously it's more than we've experienced. What's driving it?
Yeah. So, one of the things that the data also said was that there's unclear management practices. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you talk about uncertainty and thriving in uncertainty. Well, when you have a lot of change that creates uncertainty, that creates a lack of clarity. And so, so for example, do we have our cameras on or off in our virtual meeting? If we have not created a shared expectation about that, I might say, Meridith, you're so rude. Why did you do it? I have your camera on. And you're like, oh my God, I am so tired. I've had 18 meetings today already. And we're not trying to tick each other off, right? But if we don't know shared expectation, people are then going to interpret that. And so that's one of the things that we have been really finding. Another is lingering mental health challenges from the pandemic. And whenever we share this with keynote audiences, there's always somebody raises their hand, says, didn't we have mental health issues before? And yes, of course. But for many people, it's gotten more intense, or people feel more confident to talk about it. And so that's going on too. People are tired. So you've got a lot of change without a lot of clarity of management practices. You've got managers who haven't necessarily been trained to navigate the new dynamics of the workforce. And you've got people who are either understaffed, overwhelmed, or dealing with stress and mental health issues. And all of that it makes the trigger faster on how we're dealing with the conflict, or it creates the desire to avoid the conflict altogether. And on the other side of these conversations is where you're going to get the collaboration and the creativity. And, we're big innovation people, right? So you can't have really good innovation without productive conflict.
The other thing I would add is there's a little bit of a skill loss that's happened as well. And it's come about in the social media age as we, you see the things that people type in comments that they would never hopefully say in a 2 or 3 or 4 person conversation face to face. And the algorithms that fuel that sort of, if there's hate and rage and everything, it attracts eyeballs, it gets more clicks. And so it fuels that. And so there's that tendency to that whole temperature rise and, not as many people learning these skills along the way. So again, the need for the practical tools to do it.
Yeah, I really could not agree more. It was, I was doing a presentation, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me to present on collaboration, which is not really something I present on that often, but I was working in a piece there. And when I was doing the research on it, and one of the exercises I gave them to do was really think about the 5 people they needed to be connected to in the company in order to do their job better. So to build those relationships now before you need them. And I could tell some of the audience was looking at me a little like, why do I need to do that? And it reminds me of a medical study I read. My father-in-law was a general surgeon back when the general surgeon was in the hospital and all the doctors were in the hospital, back before we had, I forget what they call those specialists now, the hospitalists who just stay in the hospital. And he said, we solved so many problems in the stairwell or in the halls because I saw them every day.
Right.
And we would talk about a patient, or we would talk about that. So I think you're so right that I think the conflict has increased because I can do it all right here from my desk, and I never have to engage with you. And I can be mean on social media or email. So how do you, in the work that you do and in the book, I want to get to the phrases, but the thing I want to get to first is that in the work that I do with leaders, conflict is like number 1 or 2 of the biggest frickin' thing they avoid, right? Like at all costs. Like if I avoid it, it will go away. And we know that isn't true. Conflict gets worse. I call it the cosmic Band-Aid. You can rip it fast and it hurts and it's over, or you can rip it slow and it's still going to hurt and it's going to be painful. So Karin, how do you get people to buy into this idea that they need to have productive conflict and to get past that obvious fear they have with it?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Meredith. I think the best way to describe this is the call we got from this executive team the other day. So they were a global team. They do not spend that much time in person together. And they were having so much conflict this way, like together, but conflict in a very matrixed organization. It was a lot of complex conflict. The first thing that we really needed people to understand is that they all wanted the same thing. There really needed to be clarity. And so, by talking to each person, and we collected the data, and so then we presented to start. Before we start, you all want the same thing. This is what you said you want. And I think that there was an exhale, because I think there was a thinking of maybe we're not all on the same page. But once you get that clarity of what are we really trying to accomplish, that is the first thing. Then people were a little more open, because now we're having a productive conversation of what is it going to take for us to get this thing done. And one of the fast ways we do that is we have teams draw 2 pictures. This is the team I see as I see it today, and this is the team as I'd like it to be. The pictures always rhyme. People always say, there's always the same problem. We're in silos. We've got too much going on. We don't, but the vision for the future is always rhymes. And so that you get people saying, okay, so how are we going to get from here to there? Now, and we are really big on habits, not just talking about high level 4 dimensions, but we break this down into habits. So for these green cards are connection habits. The orange cards are curiosity habits, and get people to really think about what are the habits of how we're going to work together that would really make the biggest difference. that feels safer, right? Because we're not leaning into, you did this thing to me that one time and I don't trust your intention. We're saying, no, this is the vision we've agreed on. Now, what are the habits, 2 or 3 habits that are going to make the biggest difference if we all did them consistently to accomplish that? And that gets so practical and tactical. And then you build out an action plan towards that. It is amazing how fast a team will come together when they really self-discover what it is that they need.
David, why are we never taught? I mean, and are we never taught to handle conflict? I mean, I was just listening to a news program that was talking about, I guess, Gen Z are taking adult classes now. They're learning things like how to do their taxes and how to change a tire. And there are things that, most of us learned as kids, but we don't learn anymore. Are we just not taught how to handle conflict?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about your schooling, I mean, anyone you're listening right now, did you take a class on how to have a difference of opinion with somebody on a topic that you really both care about and where you want success and where it matters? And like, how do you get there? I never took that class. I don't know that class exists, still doesn't exist. So it's fascinating. So where do we pick up our answers to that? Well, we learn it from role models. We see behaviors, and most of those are not always good. So unless we were fortunate to have a role model, either a parent, a leader, an adult figure somewhere who modeled that and took the time to explain it to us, we probably didn't learn it. And so, it's like you're saying, adulting classes, right? There's a lot of those kinds of things that we just don't learn. And so, but it's the same thing with all of us that are in this leadership management space, right? You can get an MBA and never learn how to have a good accountability conversation, which if you don't know how to do that, you're not ready to lead. So, it's the same kind of thing, these human skills that we need. So, as you're talking about, where's that motivation come from? Karin talked about the team level. If you're an individual, nothing changes if you don't say something. And anytime you're staying silent, you're depriving the other person of a chance to make a different choice. You're depriving yourself of the opportunity to learn something that's going to help you get a more peaceful outcome. The only way to find those outcomes and to get real lasting success, real collaboration, any of the things that we want, is to have the conversation. And so that's the way that we talk about it for an individual.
Karin, what are some of those phrases? Let's talk about, like when I think about conflict, it's, I understand how important it is, but I tell you, it has got to be one of the number one challenges I see in organizations is leaders just doing everything they can to avoid having conflict. So where do you start with a leader, and what are the things that you have them say and get comfortable? What are the phrases that work?
Yeah. So in the book, we have over 300 powerful phrases, but there are 12 that we call the GOATs, the greatest of all time powerful phrases. And so if you run into me at a conference and I've got a big goat mascot by my side, that's why people are like, why the goat? Goats, greatest of all time powerful phrases. So connection. Let's take some connection GOATs. I really care about, and then you insert the thing that you really care about. I really care about you, if you really do. Yeah. But when you just met, I really care about this customer that we're both serving. I really care about this project that we're on. And I'm confident we can find a solution we can both work with here. Mm-hmm. So it's a connection, and then it's the level of confidence. Let's work on this. Now that only works if you are genuinely if you've got a coworker who's thrown you under the bus and stole credit for your idea and they really care about you. You're gonna hard no, right? That's right. Not true. Another connection one is tell me more. If somebody comes to you really fired up and they're upset and they're getting louder, either metaphorically louder or actually louder, it's usually because they're trying to be heard. So if one of the first things you say is, oh, wow, it sounds like you're really upset. Can you tell me more? They're going to calm down because they don't have to feel loud because they know you're listening. And then one of my favorite, I think it is my favorite powerful phrase in the entire book, is a clarity GOAT, which is, what would a successful outcome do for you? Now, we all say, what does success look like? This takes it a level deeper. So Meridith, imagine you and I are working on a project together and our boss has given us something and we're real clear about what success looks like. And we're tempted to just go off to the races and get it done. But what if we pause and say this? And I say, Meridith, what would a successful outcome do for you? And you say, Karin, I got to tell you, I have been traveling like crazy. I'm trying to work on this big conference, this big speaker conference. I got so much going on. I will tell you what a successful outcome would do for me is that We are done this thing by 5 o'clock on Friday. So I don't have to think about it over the weekend. We come in on Monday, we do our executive readout and we're good. But 5 o'clock, we're done. Now, and I say, oh, wow. Now, that's good for me to know, because what if I haven't been running crazy, right? I wouldn't mind. It's important. I might not mind working on Saturday. And then you say, well, Karin, what would a successful outcome do for you? And I say, Meredith, I got to tell you, I don't think my boss sees my genius around this topic. Like, I am really good at this, but I feel like I'm being underestimated. So on Monday, when we do the readout and the real hardball questions come, can you let me jump in and take them so they get it that I'm a significant contributor to this project? Now, if we haven't had that conversation, you might be trying to be very helpful to take the hard questions. I might be trying to be helpful to get it really right, working extra on Saturday, but we didn't mean to have that conflict.
Yeah.
Those are two examples.
Yeah. It's so good. So a question I've got is, in fact, I've got it right now with a client that she feels like she's direct and she feels like she is not conflict avoidant, but she is offensive to the rest of the team. Where do you go with when you don't feel like you're avoiding conflict, but maybe the team is conflict adverse? David, where do you start with that?
There's a couple different directions to go with that one. And so, if I'm a team member, it depends on the hat I'm wearing. So if I'm that manager, that person who I feel like I'm being direct, but I'm actually ending up, I actually have a call with a coaching client coming up on this very topic. Great leader, but when they get stressed out and pressured, they're alienating everybody on the team because of the way they're handling it. So if I'm on that team, I can have a conversation with my manager. We have a chapter in the book on if your manager is moody, dropper of F-bombs, things like that, because it happens.
Yes.
And we have those people in our life. So how do we have that conversation? So again, I'm going to start with connection. Hey, boss, I really care about the success of our team. I really care about accomplishing what it is that you're after here. And I want you to know that. And then another powerful phrase in the book that we just love, my intent for this conversation is so that. My intent for this conversation is to talk about how you're addressing this when you get super pressured so that we can ensure the team is getting the results we need for you and for the company. All right. So I'm setting that intention out there. I'm not hiding anything. I'm putting it out there. That allows the other person to enroll in the conversation. You can use that in almost any situation, but particularly useful here. And so then I would say, I noticed in the conversation this morning that when we got on this topic that you said, and if I can calmly repeat the exact words, you said, there's no effing way. I'm tired of this effing this and that. And the next thing, if I repeat that back in a clear, non-emotional way, that has an impact. It's holding up a mirror and reflecting back. And so I noticed that that's what you said. I'm not sure if you're aware how that's coming across. It is making it very difficult for me personally, and I'm probably speaking for others on the team, but making it difficult for us to solve the problems that you need solved because of the level of emotion that we're dealing with and trying to navigate that. And I know that's not your intent. I'm pretty confident of that.
Nice.
Pretty confident we want to solve the problem. I'm wondering if we can, and we actually have a client in our realm of all of our folks who was dealing with some of this, and the team addressed it, and they came up with a really fun way. And the manager, the boss, the very senior leader said, you're right. Okay, here's what we're going to do instead. And every time he wanted to use one of those words, he would insert a goofy, made up nonsense word. And it just immediately.
But it always started with F, the goofy, made up word.
Like,
so here's the outcome was, so this is very executive team, right? The outcome was when he would say Farbagoogle, it lightened the mood, but people also knew he was ticked.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So he could still express his emotion about it. And so I think that's why that worked. But he did that for a month and then it just calmed down. It just because he was realizing that people would still listen to him without with it.
Yeah, but without offending, which gave them the quote unquote excuse to resist or make him kind of the bad guy and not get the project accomplished or what he needed done moving forward.
And if you're on the leadership side of that conversation and you gain this kind of awareness, there's that temptation to go, well, people should just suck it up. If I have a right to be upset, well, of course you have a right to be upset. But you just said it, Meredith. If I am giving people hostility in any form, you got to understand how human minds work.
Exactly.
Immediately when we encounter a threat, we resist it. We freeze, flight, flee, start to team up, whatever we do. And we're automatically not getting people solving a problem. So when we approach people with that kind of energy, we're automatically giving, even when they know we're right. It's like, what's the matter with David?
Yes.
As opposed to, gosh, how are we going to solve this problem? We want people thinking, how are we going to solve this problem?
Right.
And so it's just the way to be effective when you start to hear those things.
Meredith, you also asked earlier about levels. And one of the observations we have about levels is that when you get the higher, so I do a lot of work with really executive teams. And what I find is they're like, well, they get paid the big bucks.
Right.
So I can just be totally candid with them. And they're still human beings though. And so you have that, and why won't my boss say thank you to me, or why don't they appreciate me? And you're having all that dynamic and the stress, but then you're asking these executives to go lead well and lead collaboratively and be role models of all this, but they're like, yeah, but I don't get treated that way, and that creates exhaustion in organizations. And I think remembering that, and there's a tendency. This happened to David and I the other day. I was really fired up about something, and he was like, and I'm like, and that's a stupid idea. Like, no, we talk about innovation, right? And he's like, would you ever say that to anybody else in our entire organization or to any client, or would you ever recommend, right? But why? Because we're close.
Exactly.
Right. And so, but he was absolutely right. Don't talk to the people that you care about the most, the worst. But I think there's a tendency to do that.
Or to think, well, I'm paying these people, it's a job, I can talk to them any way I want, which is technically true. You can, but if you want people to be productive, if you want them to be engaged, if you want them to be performing at their best, then you've got to find out a way to handle that. It is hard to believe, but we are at the end of this podcast. I always like to end with two questions, and I'd like to know the first from both of you. When you think about the times that we're in, I mean, rapid change. I think Accenture released a report, said the world's moving 183% faster than it used to. The amount of stress that's in the workplace. When you think about that and you think about the work that you do, what is your greatest piece of advice to help leaders learn to turn uncertainty to competitive advantage? And either one of you can go first.
You want to go first, David?
I think the ability to, when we're talking about uncertainty and being able to thrive in the middle of uncertainty, there's that ability to take in a lot of information, make decisions quickly, not be attached to where we were, and be able to move and change directions, but with intention and with follow through. And to me, the ability to do all of that requires the skills we've been talking about. So if we are able to invest in the connection, the clarity, the curiosity, and the commitment, we're giving ourselves and our teams the tools to navigate uncertainty well. We're going to more quickly get the information we need. We're going to more quickly establish the clarity we can have. What is clear? Yeah, there's a lot that's changing, but there's some things that aren't. And so if we're clear on those and we're clear on what we know today, here's what we're going to do. What are the obstacles? What are the opportunities? Okay, great. We've analyzed, we've heard from people. Now let's move with our commitment. So if we have those abilities, that's going to be a competitive advantage in navigating the uncertain and changing world that we're in.
Yeah. I would just add, taking big concepts, because it's easy to say, well, we need to have better critical thinking and problem solving on this team to deal with this uncertainty. Okay, sure. What does that look like? Right. So take those or we need to work better, more collaboratively as a team. And we'll have meetings and people will say that, but what does that mean? And breaking that down to what does that mean we're going to do as a team every single day? What are the habits? How are we going to operate together? And I think that's the conversation that we see people exhale when you move from high level, we should do this kind of thing, to this is exactly what we're going to do next. And I think in shorter time horizons, trying to decide what your AI strategy is for the next 5 years is a crazy task, right?
And probably a waste of time too, right? Because it's probably going to change,
right? Because everything
5 weeks.
Changing. But what's our AI strategy going to be for the next 60 days? That's a useful. And what exactly are you going to do for that? That's a conversation that will calm people down.
Yeah. This is such an important book and such an important topic. How do people find out more about you? Where do they find the book, and where do they tap into your services?
Well, thank you so much, Meredith. It's been our pleasure. Our book is called Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict: What to Say Next to De-Stress the Workday, Build Collaboration, and Calm Difficult Customers. And our company is called Let's Grow Leaders. And if you go to our website, Let's Grow Leaders, you will find all of our books, links to all of that, a lot of free stuff. We write a book. David does a podcast. We write a blog every week. I have a show called Asking for a Friend. And you can learn more about our team collaboration system, where you get down to the practical, tactical habits to make this happen, the Synergy Stack system.
Well, it is such good information. I really thank you both for joining us today, and we want to reserve the right to have you back. I feel like we have lots more to talk about.
It's been our pleasure.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll see you all right back here next week for another episode of Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss everything you know, because together we are going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage.